after Trump won in 16, I remember the name just got mentioned. Just someone mentioned it, not for or against. And the hostess walked up to them and said, "We don't say that name here." And it was over. Like, we will not have this conversation. And please don't ever mention his name again. And it was
Mhm.
like, well, wait a minute. And she didn't care. So it seems like that polarization continues on. And it's not just with the neighbor down the street, it's within families and in households.
Absolutely.
How do we cultivate a winsome attitude as we try to go about these discussions? Because I think the putting our heads in the sand doesn't work. We
Mhm.
need to be able to engage civilly, lovingly, listening posture as we go about this. How do we cultivate that?
Yeah. Well, first I should say it's not easy. If these things were easy, they would be done, there'd be far more widespread than they are. Um, when I mention epistemic humility, I want to explain that just a little bit because so often people think like, well, you're talking about relativism, and absolutely not. Dallas Willard talked about how a sense of certainty said nothing about the reliability of the information. It only told you about the state of mind of the subject. And you know, having an epistemic humility does not at all require us to kind of lay down convictions. What it does mean is acknowledging that as a fallen and limited human being, we have certain limitations of perspective, as well as a tendency kind of, endemic to our race towards motivated reasoning.
Mm.
And so it means kind of acknowledging that and having a certain both curiosity and willingness to listen to others. Now, often you can listen quite a bit and like walk away more convinced than ever of the rightness of one's cause or thought or conviction. But what an epistemic humility does is open one up to listen, to ask questions, but also just to realize like there's often things to be learned even from someone with whom you may disagree. Uh, and I think part of, certainly not all, but part of what has happened is we have gotten kind of so locked in to opinions that we actually don't even really know all that much about. I think just recently, like well, Jimmy Kimmel had a few people on. They said that they ascribed a certain action to one presidential candidate and then said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I got the wrong guy. It was the other one." And the way people reacted to the statement completely flip-flopped. Before Trinity Forum, I worked within conservative policy circles. It has been interesting to me to see total flip-flops on various issue areas from what they were before. And it's just sort of disregarded. There's been a certain emotional or psychological kind of digging in that seems to be kind of divorced from policy or principled conviction, such that like questioning a particular candidate is seen as somehow an insult directed towards one's person. And if one's
Mm.
responding that way, yeah, I would take a step back and kind of ask, myself, what's going on here? Why is it that I'm acting like I'm attacked if someone criticizes my candidate? Why am I identifying so closely with them that I'm taking umbrage over what should be a policy disagreement? I can say this, having worked in the White House for President Bush, it was very common for people, you see people at a party or whatever it is, for people to come up to tell you all the things that they don't like about what your boss is doing. It was part and parcel of the job.
You're like,
Um,
Mrs. Bush, I can't talk about this right now.
Usually they like her, but it was like her husband,
Oh yeah, no, it's
all up in
funny.
arms about whatever it was that President Bush was doing. And that was never fun, when you work for a person, and I have a great deal of respect and admiration for President Bush. Not a perfect man, none of us are, but I think there was a real sense of honor and dignity and try to do the right thing. Um, but the way you see people react now is so much more extreme, where there is a certain identification that's going on that is strange. A personal identification that goes beyond policy alignment, goes beyond principled alignment. And I think it's something that if one finds oneself doing this, to sit and think and reflect on a bit.